Right, so before I get into this, I just want to say don't do what I did. I'm not saying that as some kind of cheesy warning like, stay away from the dark web, even though, yeah, maybe do that too, but more like seriously what I went through, it's not worth it. I've lost everything because of this. And when I say everything, I mean everything. It all started a few months ago. I was bored, jobless, and just honestly going through some stuff. I was living alone in this tiny one-bedroom apartment. Rent was cheap, but the walls were paper thin, and I could hear the neighbors fighting at all hours. There were roaches in the kitchen, the heat barely worked, and the water always smelled like rust. It was pretty much rock bottom. I was online most of the time, just messing around on Reddit, YouTube, you know the drill. Watching a ton of those videos where people explore the dark web. I never took them seriously. It was always just guys buying mystery boxes with fake severed heads, or they'd find some weird website selling cursed dolls. I thought it was all for show. Then I came across this one thread that was different. It wasn't one of those top 10 creepy websites you should never visit kind of things. It was more like, if you want to see the real dark web, here's where you should go. The guy who posted it, he wasn't selling it like some spooky story, he just sounded legit. There was this list of URLs and hidden websites that he claimed would show you the real stuff. Of course I was curious, stupid but curious. I downloaded Tor, got a VPN and thought, what's the worst that could happen? I'd been on the internet since I was a kid, figured I could handle a few sketchy sites. So I started browsing. At first it was just weird stuff. Old forums, some hacker chat rooms, weird services, but nothing that bad. Until I found the site. It didn't have a name, at least not one that I could read. The URL was just a random string of letters and numbers, and the site itself was basic, just a black background with a single button in the middle. Enter. I was stupid, I clicked it. The page loaded, and what I saw next was just wrong. Like, I've seen some messed up stuff on the internet before, but this was different. It was a live stream, grainy, low quality, but definitely real. There was a guy, bound to a chair, gagged and blindfolded. His head was hanging low like he was unconscious or something. In the corner of the screen, there was a countdown. It had maybe 20 minutes left. I didn't know what to think. I just sat there, watching, heart racing, and I was about to close out of the window when the chat started lighting up. The people in the chat, man, I don't even know if I can call them people. They were throwing out the most messed up stuff, talking about what they wanted to see happen to the guy in the chair, the kind of stuff that would get you thrown in prison if you said it out loud. And it wasn't just words. They were voting on what should happen to him next, like actually picking his fate. I was frozen. I couldn't click away. As the timer counted down, the votes tallied up, and the winner was something that made me feel sick just reading it. Remove his eyes. I thought it was a joke, some kind of sick joke. But then the feed cut to this other angle, and I saw someone step into the room. They were wearing a mask, like one of those plain white theater masks, but you could tell they knew what they were doing. They walked up to the guy in the chair and he started thrashing, realizing what was about to happen. The chat was loving it. They were spamming stuff like, yes, and do it, and other crap I don't even want to repeat. And then they did it. The masked person took out something sharp, I don't even know what it was, and started gouging at his eyes. There was blood everywhere, the screams. I swear I can still hear them. They were muffled by the gag, but you could hear the pain. The guy was thrashing, trying to break free, but it was like they had him locked down tight. The whole time the chat was going wild, like they were getting off on it. The person doing the cutting didn't say a word. They just kept going. I should have clicked away. I should have closed the browser, unplugged my computer, thrown it out the damn window if I had to, but I didn't. I just sat there staring at the screen, feeling sicker by the second, like I was trapped in some nightmare. When it was finally over, the screen went black, and I was left sitting there in the dark with my own reflection staring back at me from the monitor. I was shaking, literally shaking. I don't know how long I sat there like that, but eventually I forced myself to close the laptop. I told myself I was done, that was it. I wouldn't go back on the site, but even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. That image, those screams, They were burned into my brain. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see it, hear it. The sick part is, even though it horrified me, part of me wanted to see more. I can't explain it. It was like this itch I couldn't scratch. For the next few days, I couldn't think about anything else. I couldn't sleep. I barely ate. I kept hearing that guy's screams in my head, and every time I opened my laptop, I could feel the pull. Like the site was just waiting for me to come back. I held off for as long as I could. But then, about a week later, I cracked. I went back on. This time, it was different. The page didn't show a live stream. Instead, it showed a message. Welcome back. I felt this weird chill run down my spine. My heart was pounding in my chest. Underneath the message was a link. Join us. I don't know what I was expecting when I clicked it, but it took me to this weird questionnaire. They were asking about my preferences, like what kind of stuff I wanted to see. I can't even write some of the things they asked. It was that messed up. But I didn't answer. I just sat there, staring at the screen, wondering what kind of people would even fill that stuff out. Then the last question popped up. Would you like to participate? My stomach dropped. I don't know why, but I clicked no. Immediately, the screen flashed red. Then this message popped up. We'll be watching. I slammed my laptop shut so fast I almost knocked it off my desk. My hands were shaking. I felt like I was going to throw up. But I wasn't done yet, because that's when the emails started. At first, they were vague, just random subject lines like, "You've been chosen," or "Don't ignore us." I thought it was spam, but the messages kept coming. They started getting personal. They knew my name, my address, my family, everything. I thought it was some kind of scam, so I blocked the sender. But then, they started showing up from different addresses, different names, and they were getting more threatening. You've seen too much. You'll regret saying no. One day, I got home from running errands, and there was an envelope waiting for me. No return address, just my name on it in this messy handwriting. I opened it up, and inside was a single Polaroid. It was a picture of my front door, taken that same morning. That's when I knew they weren't just messing around. They were watching me. So, I stared at that Polaroid for what felt like hours, my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped it. I remember the feeling, like my entire body went cold. You know that gut-wrenching, ice-in-your-veins feeling when something horrible has happened? That's what it was like. Except it wasn't something that had happened. It was something that was about to happen. I wasn't even sure what to do at that point. I'd already blocked the emails. I'd stopped visiting the site, but somehow they'd found me. They knew where I lived. And it wasn't just that. The picture was from that morning, meaning whoever took it had been outside my apartment while I was out. I started second-guessing everything. Had I seen someone watching me while I was getting groceries? Maybe a car parked down the street too long? My mind was racing with paranoia, but I couldn't think straight. I checked all the locks on my doors and windows at least 5 times. Then, for the first time since I'd moved into that dump, I called the cops. Now here's the thing. I thought telling the police would help. I figured I'd show them the Polaroid, explain about the creepy emails, and they'd take it seriously. But it didn't go down like that at all. I could tell the second I started talking that the officer didn't give a shit. I went through the whole thing, told him about the website, the emails, the picture, and he just looked at me like I was a paranoid conspiracy nut. He actually asked me, "Are you sure this isn't some prank? Maybe one of your friends is messing with you." I didn't even have friends. I lived alone. I didn't talk to anyone unless I had to, and even then, it was only small talk with the grocery store cashier. My life was basically invisible. Who the hell would prank me? When I showed him the Polaroid, he just sighed and scribbled something on his notepad saying, "We'll file a report, but there's not much we can do without a direct threat." A direct threat. The picture of my door wasn't enough? I argued with him for a bit, but it was no use. He left after about 20 minutes, probably thinking I was just some loser with too much time on my hands. I locked the door behind him and just sat on the floor, trying to figure out my next move. That's when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. For a second, I thought it was the cop calling me back, maybe realizing there was more to it. But when I picked up, all I heard was breathing. Heavy, slow breathing, like someone was standing right outside my window, just listening. I hung up immediately, my heart pounding in my chest. The call came again, same number. This time, I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I saw I had a new message. My stomach was in knots, but I played it. There was no voice, no words, just that same breathing, slow and deliberate. I could feel my skin crawling, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. I deleted it without even listening to the whole thing. I shut off my phone, grabbed a kitchen knife and sat in my living room, just staring at the door. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep for a long time after that, actually. I was too afraid they were out there, just waiting. Every noise I heard, the creaking of the old pipes, the neighbors moving around upstairs, the wind rattling the windows, every sound made me jump. But after a few days of nothing happening, I started to think maybe it was over. Maybe they'd moved on, found some other poor sap to mess with. I even convinced myself the picture was a scare tactic, and the phone calls were probably just a prank. I thought maybe I was in the clear. I couldn't have been more wrong. About a week after the Polaroid showed up, I was on my way home from grabbing dinner, fast food, the only thing I could stomach these days. It was dark out, and my apartment complex was in this sketchy part of town where the streetlights barely worked. As I walked up to my building, I noticed something strange. There was a light on in my apartment. That wasn't right. I always kept the lights off when I wasn't home, partly to save money and partly because I didn't want anyone seeing in. I stopped dead in my tracks, staring up at the window. My heart was racing, and I couldn't decide what to do. My first thought was to call the cops again, but after last time, I knew they wouldn't take me seriously. Then my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. I hesitated, but I knew I had to answer it. The second I picked up, I heard the same heavy breathing, like someone was standing right next to me. But this time, there was more. After a few seconds of breathing, I heard a voice. It was low and raspy, like the person had been screaming for hours and their throat was torn up. They whispered just one word, "Look." I froze. Then I heard it, a sound from inside my apartment. A scraping noise, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. The light flickered, and my blood went cold. I couldn't move. I was standing there on the sidewalk, staring up at my window, phone pressed to my ear, listening to this psychopath inside my home. I didn't even think about running. I should have, but I didn't. I just stood there, waiting for something to happen. And then it did. The curtain moved. Just a little. But enough for me to see the outline of something standing there watching me from the other side of the glass. I dropped my phone. My body finally caught up with my brain, and I turned and bolted. I didn't even grab my keys, didn't bother locking the front door. I ran until I couldn't breathe, my legs burning, the world around me a blur. I didn't stop until I found myself at a gas station a couple of miles away. The clerk looked at me like I was insane, out of breath, sweating, and clutching the knife I'd been carrying. I don't remember much of what I said to him, but I do remember the fear in his eyes. He gave me his phone and I called the cops again. This time they actually took it seriously. A couple of cruisers showed up, and I rode with them back to my apartment. They told me to stay outside while they checked it out. I stood there in the parking lot, my heart pounding, staring up at the window where I'd seen that figure. My lights were off now. The whole building looked quiet, like nothing had ever happened. A few minutes later, the cops came back out. One of them looked pissed. "There's no one in there," he said, like I'd just wasted his time. "And nothing's out of place. You sure you didn't leave the lights on?" I tried to explain about the phone calls, the voice, the figure in the window, but he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed and said, "We'll keep a patrol car nearby, just in case, but next time, make sure it's an actual emergency before you call us, all right?" I couldn't believe it. They were treating me like I was crazy, like I was making all this up. I knew what I saw. I knew someone had been in my apartment, but there was nothing I could do. After the cops left, I couldn't even bring myself to go back inside. I ended up crashing at a cheap motel that night. The next morning, I went back to my place, thinking maybe I'd find something, anything, that would prove I wasn't losing my mind. But when I walked in, everything looked normal. No sign of forced entry, no broken windows, nothing missing, except the Polaroid. It was gone.
That's when it hit me. They'd been in my apartment. They'd taken the photo, the only proof I had, like they were cleaning up after themselves. Like they wanted me to feel crazy, to doubt myself. I didn't even know what to do at that point. The police didn't believe me, and I had no proof. But I knew, deep down, this wasn't over. In fact, it was only getting started. After that night, I stopped feeling safe. Everywhere I went, I had this gnawing sensation in the pit of my stomach, like eyes were constantly on me, watching. I tried to go back to my daily routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every little sound, every flicker of movement in my peripheral vision had me on edge. I couldn't sleep for more than an hour at a time, and when I did, the nightmares were worse than the reality I was living. I had to face it. Whoever these people were, they weren't just some trolls trying to mess with me. They had found me, gotten inside my apartment, and now they had something over me. Every moment felt like I was living in a horror movie where I was the helpless victim. I tried to stay off the internet for a while, thinking maybe that would make it stop. No Reddit, no YouTube, definitely no more dark web. I thought if I cut off that world, they'd lose interest and move on. But that was just me lying to myself again, like I had from the start. Because no matter what I did, I couldn't get away. I started noticing things, small at first, things only I would pick up on. My apartment, little details were off. I'd come home, and the chair at my desk would be slightly turned to the side. A cabinet in the kitchen would be left open when I was sure I'd closed it. Nothing huge, but enough to make me question myself every time I walked through the door. Was it just me being paranoid, or were they still coming in while I was gone? I bought new locks, even added a cheap security camera outside my door, but nothing helped. The thing with this kind of paranoia is, once it's in your head, you can't shake it. It consumes you. Every time I left the apartment, I was in constant fear of what I'd find when I got back. And then, it got worse. One day, I came home from work. I'd finally managed to get a part-time gig, hoping it would help distract me from everything. But when I walked into my apartment, I knew instantly that something was very wrong. It wasn't like the other times where things had just been slightly off. No, this time, it was blatant. The TV was on, but it was just static. My couch cushions were thrown onto the floor. The fridge door was wide open. I could feel my pulse pounding in my neck as I slowly walked inside. The whole place smelled weird, like something had been left out to rot. I stepped further into the living room, and that's when I saw it, my laptop sitting open on the coffee table. That was the first thing that sent a chill down my spine because I always kept it shut. But there it was, wide open, the screen on. I stepped closer, hesitant as hell, and saw the website. The website. It was open again, the same dark background, that same eerie button in the center. Enter. My mind went blank. I couldn't even process how it had happened. I hadn't touched that site since the last time, hadn't even dared to think about it, but now it was back, like it had found me again, like it was inviting me to dive back in. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part was what was next to the laptop. My heart skipped a beat when I saw it. Another Polaroid. But this time, it wasn't of my front door. It was of me. The photo showed me sleeping, curled up in bed, my face half hidden in the sheets. I could see the shadow of someone standing over me, holding the camera. Whoever took the picture had been right there, inches away from me while I slept.
I dropped the photo and backed away so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. My body went cold again, like it had back when I saw the first Polaroid. The realization hit me like a truck. They hadn't just been messing with my stuff while I was out. They'd been in my apartment while I was there, watching me, taking pictures. My first instinct was to run again, but something in me snapped. I was sick of running, sick of feeling like a rat trapped in a maze, being toyed with. I had to know what was going on. So I sat down at the table, stared at that screen, and against every better judgment I had left, I clicked enter. The site loaded instantly, but this time it wasn't a live stream. No grainy video feed, no chat full of psychos voting on someone's fate. It was worse. It was a list. I scrolled through, my stomach churning as I read the names on the screen. Names of people, actual people, with photos next to them. Photos of them in everyday situations like walking down the street, sitting at a cafe or driving. I didn't know any of them, but it didn't matter. I knew what this was. I was looking at a hit list, and each name had a price next to it, like someone was offering bounties on them. The more I scrolled, the worse it got. People of all ages, men, women, even kids. But the thing that made my blood run cold, the thing that nearly made me vomit right there on my keyboard, was the last name on the list. It was mine. My full name, my photo, one of me walking out of my apartment a few days ago, looking down at my phone like a clueless idiot. There was a price next to my name too, just like the others. And it wasn't small. It was a number that made my heart skip a beat, enough to know that whoever wanted me gone was serious. I stared at the screen, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of sick joke? But deep down I knew it wasn't. These people weren't just watching me, they were planning something. The chat box appeared again at the bottom of the screen. This time, though, there was no voting. No twisted suggestions. Just one message. Do you want to live? I could barely process it. My hands were shaking, sweat pouring down my face. I didn't type anything at first, just sat there staring at the question. Did I want to live? Of course I did. But what kind of question was that? Who the hell were these people? Another message popped up. Last chance. Say yes, and you'll owe us. Say no, and it's over. I thought about calling the cops again, but what were they going to do? They hadn't believed me before, and now? They'd probably lock me up in a psych ward. Besides, the way this thing was playing out, I knew whoever was behind this had me trapped. I was way past the point of normal. This was something else, something way beyond what I could handle. So I did the only thing I could think of. I typed yes. I hit enter, and immediately the screen went black. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest that I could feel it in my throat. I half expected someone to break down my door right then, but nothing happened. A few seconds later, the screen flickered back to life, showing just one message in bold red letters. We'll be in touch. That's it. No more details, no threats, nothing. Just a promise, if you could even call it that. I slammed the laptop shut, breathing heavy, panic gripping my chest like a vice. What the hell had I just agreed to? What did they mean by owe us? I didn't have any answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I was in deep now, deeper than I'd ever been, and there was no way out. I didn't sleep that night. Hell, I didn't sleep for days after that. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I imagined those people coming for me. And now, I wasn't even sure if they would, or if they'd just wait for the right moment. That was the worst part, the waiting. The feeling of not knowing when or how it would happen, only that it would. And then, exactly a week later, I got the call. Unknown number again. I picked up, my hands trembling. The same heavy breathing greeted me, but this time the voice was different. It wasn't raspy or whispery like before. It was clear, calm, and terrifying in how cold it sounded. You owe us. Time to pay. I wanted to hang up, but I couldn't. It felt like a hand was gripping my throat, stopping me from doing anything but listen. We need you to do something. You'll know when it's time. If you don't, well, you already know what happens next. Then the line went dead. I sat there, my whole body shaking, not knowing what to do. All I knew was that I wasn't in control anymore. My life wasn't mine. And they were just getting started. After that call, My life became a waiting game. It was like living with a noose around my neck, just waiting for the moment it would tighten. I tried to go about my days like everything was normal, but nothing was normal anymore. I didn't leave my apartment unless I absolutely had to. Every time I stepped outside, I felt like a target was painted on my back. I stopped trusting anyone. I'd catch people glancing at me on the street and immediately assume they were part of it. I knew I was being watched. But by who? When? How many people were in on this? Every day was a new paranoia. And the worst part was the waiting, knowing that I'd agreed to something, but having no clue what it was. Every time my phone buzzed, every time I heard a creak in the floorboards, I thought, this is it. This is the moment. The days turned into weeks, and it got to a point where I couldn't tell what was real anymore. I wasn't sleeping. I barely ate. The constant fear was wearing me down, and I was starting to crack. Every night, I'd sit in the corner of my room, holding that same kitchen knife, just staring at the door, waiting for someone to bust in. But then, nothing happened. I started to wonder if maybe they were done with me. Maybe they were just messing with my head, seeing how far they could push me before I broke. And then, one night, they finally made their move. It was late, probably around 2 a.m. I was lying in bed trying to shut my mind off when I heard it. A soft knock on my door, not loud, not frantic, just this steady, calm knock that sent chills down my spine. My heart stopped. I knew instantly that this wasn't some drunk neighbor or a random mistake. It was them. I grabbed the knife from under my pillow, my hand shaking so badly I could barely keep a grip on it. The knock came again. Still soft, still patient, like whoever was on the other side knew I'd answer eventually. And deep down, I knew I didn't have a choice. I got out of bed and crept towards the door, every step feeling like I was walking towards my own execution. My throat was dry, my pulse hammering in my ears. I pressed my ear against the door, but there was no sound, no voices, no footsteps, just that suffocating silence. And then, without thinking, I opened the door. I don't know what I was expecting, some masked figure maybe, or a group of people ready to drag me off. But when the door swung open, there was no one there. The hallway was empty. I stood frozen for a moment, staring out into the dimly lit corridor, not sure what the hell was going on. Had they been messing with me again? Had they come and gone? Then I looked down. There was a package, a small plain cardboard box with no writing on it, no address, just sitting there at my feet. My stomach twisted into knots as I bent down and picked it up. It wasn't heavy, but the moment I touched it, I felt this overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. Whatever was inside, I didn't want to know, but I couldn't just leave it there either. I brought it inside, locking the door behind me, and set the box down on the kitchen table. My mind was racing. I thought about just throwing it out, but deep down, I knew I couldn't. This was part of the game now. I'd opened the door, I'd taken the package, and now, whatever came next, it was out of my hands. I sat down, staring at the box like it might explode. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I forced myself to open it. My hands were trembling, heart pounding in my chest as I carefully tore through the tape and lifted the lid. Inside was a phone, a cheap burner phone, the kind you'd get at a gas station. No notes, no instructions, just the phone sitting there, dead silent, like it was waiting for me to turn it on. I stared at it for what felt like forever. I knew the second I powered it up, there'd be no turning back. Whatever this was, I was about to get dragged in deeper. But I didn't have a choice. They'd made that clear. So, I took a deep breath and pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, and immediately, a message popped up. "Are you ready to prove yourself?" I almost threw the phone across the room. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt this cold sweat break out all over my skin. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for any of this, but I knew if I didn't respond, things would get worse, much worse. I swallowed hard and typed out a shaky yes. Almost instantly, another message appeared. "We have a job for you." My stomach twisted again. I didn't want to know what the job was.
but I couldn't stop reading. The next message came through and it felt like a death sentence. Check your email. My laptop was still sitting on the coffee table where I'd left it. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to see what they'd sent me. But again, I didn't have a choice. My whole body was shaking as I opened the laptop, the familiar sense of dread washing over me as I logged into my email. There it was. An email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line just said, "Instructions." I clicked it, and my heart sank when I saw what they wanted me to do. They had sent me the name and address of some random person, a woman. They wanted me to go to her apartment and break in. No specifics, no explanation, just her name, address, and a simple line of text. "We'll be watching. Don't disappoint us." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. What the hell was this? Were they really expecting me to do this? Break into some random person's home? I couldn't. There was no way in hell I could go through with it. But as I sat there thinking about my options, I realized I didn't have any. These people, they knew everything about me. Where I lived, where I worked, my routine. They had been in my apartment while I was sleeping. If I didn't do what they asked, I knew it wouldn't end well for me. I sat there for hours, trying to talk myself out of it. I thought about running, maybe hopping on a bus to some random city, starting over. But that was a fantasy. Wherever I went, they'd find me. They always did. And if I didn't do this, they'd come for me. They'd already promised me that. Eventually, I stood up, grabbed the knife again, and shoved it into my jacket pocket. My whole body felt numb, like I was watching myself from the outside, disconnected from what I was about to do. I left my apartment around 4 a.m., the streets almost completely empty. I walked through the city in a daze, the address burned into my mind. The closer I got, the heavier my footsteps felt, like I was dragging myself towards something I couldn't stop. I kept telling myself I wouldn't actually do it, that I'd find a way to back out once I got there. But deep down, I knew the truth. When I finally reached the building, I stood outside for what felt like hours, staring up at the windows, wondering which one was hers. The knife in my pocket felt like it was burning a hole through me. My hands were slick with sweat, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn back, but I couldn't. I was in too deep now.
I walked up to the front door and tried the knob. Locked. I stood there for a minute, debating if I should just leave. But then I heard it. The soft buzz of the phone in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw the message. "Do it now, or we will." That was all it took. My hands moved on their own, pulling out the knife and shoving it into the gap between the door and the frame. I don't know how I managed it, but somehow I forced the lock open. My body was moving automatically like I was on autopilot. I stepped inside the building, my breath shallow, the world spinning around me. I climbed the stairs, every creak under my feet sounding like a gunshot in the dead silence. When I reached the door, her door, I froze. My mind was screaming at me to stop, to run, but my body wasn't listening. I raised my hand, reached for the knob, and I stood there, my hand trembling inches from the doorknob. The hallway was so silent that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my chest, my ears. I felt sick. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to stop, to turn around, to not do this. But that phone in my pocket, it was like a leash around my neck. I couldn't break free, no matter how much I wanted to. I reached for the door, swallowing hard, my throat dry and tight. My fingers touched the cold metal of the knob, and for a moment, I hesitated. I kept telling myself that I wasn't a criminal. I wasn't a killer. I wasn't like the psychos who got off on this kind of thing. But then I thought about what they'd already done to me, what they'd threatened to do. The people on that list, the ones who had disappeared. I knew I was trapped. I turned the knob, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. My heart dropped into my stomach as the door creaked open, revealing a dark apartment beyond. I stood in the doorway, staring into the blackness, my mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts, none of them good. I kept telling myself that I wouldn't hurt her, that I just needed to get inside and figure something out. But deep down, I knew I had no plan. I was just reacting now, playing a game that someone else had complete control over.
I stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind me. The apartment was eerily quiet, the air thick and stale. My hand instinctively went to the knife in my pocket, gripping the handle so tightly I could feel the pulse in my palm. I didn't want to pull it out, but the weight of it was grounding me somehow. It was the only thing I had, the only way to protect myself, if it came to that. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out the basic layout of the room. Small living space, a couch, a TV, a hallway leading to what I assumed was the bedroom. I could feel my chest tightening with every step I took, my mind racing with all the ways this could go wrong. I didn't know her. I didn't know if she was alone, if she was even here at all. But I had to keep moving. I had to see this through, or else they would. I crept down the hallway, my shoes making barely a sound on the wooden floor. The only noise was the blood rushing through my ears. I was so focused on not making a sound that when I heard it, the soft, rhythmic breathing coming from the bedroom, I nearly jumped out of my skin. She was asleep. My hand slipped into my pocket, fingers shaking as they wrapped around the cold handle of the knife. I pulled it out slowly, holding it at my side as I reached the door. It was slightly ajar, just enough for me to see her lying in bed. She was facing away from the door, curled up under the covers, completely unaware of what was happening just a few feet away. I felt this overwhelming wave of guilt crash over me. This woman, this complete stranger, she had no idea how close she was to something terrible. No idea that I was standing there, a knife in my hand, a part of something so much darker than she could ever imagine. For a moment, I almost walked away. I almost left her there. But then my phone buzzed again. I pulled it out with my free hand, dreading what I would see. The message was short, just 2 words. Do it. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, my whole body shaking now. I couldn't do it. I wasn't a murderer. I wasn't like them. But the fear of what would happen if I didn't, it was paralyzing. I stood there staring at the message, my mind racing with panic. Then, without warning, the phone buzzed again. We're watching. I felt my knees buckle. They weren't bluffing. I had no way of knowing how, but I knew they were watching me right now, making sure I followed through. If I didn't, they'd come for me, just like they'd come for the others. I was out of options. With my heart hammering in my chest, I took a deep breath and stepped into the room. Every step felt like a death march. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to be this person. But I was in too deep. I was too scared. I was just a puppet, and they were pulling the strings. I stood over her for a moment, staring down at her, knife in hand. She was breathing softly, peacefully, completely unaware of the danger standing just inches away. My hand was trembling, the knife slick with sweat. I raised it, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I kept telling myself I didn't have to go through with it, that there had to be another way out. But that phone buzzed again in my pocket, and I knew I had no choice. I gritted my teeth and closed my eyes, my hand tightening around the handle of the knife. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't do it with her face right there in front of me. I raised the knife higher, my whole body shaking, my mind screaming at me to stop, to run, to do something other than this. And then, before I could make another move, she stirred. My heart leapt into my throat as she shifted in the bed, turning onto her back, her eyes fluttering open. For a split second, our eyes met, and I froze. She saw me. She saw me.
The knife slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor as I stumbled backward, my mind going blank with panic. She screamed, a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the apartment, through my skull. I bolted for the door, my legs barely carrying me as I ran down the hallway, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't even stop to pick up the knife. I just ran. I heard her scrambling out of bed behind me, still screaming, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I slammed the door behind me and took off down the stairs, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I didn't stop running until I was halfway across the city, my lungs burning, my mind spinning. I collapsed in an alleyway, my back against a cold brick wall, my entire body shaking. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I couldn't believe I'd almost done it. And now, they knew. They knew I hadn't gone through with it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the phone, my hands trembling as I unlocked the screen. A new message was waiting for me. "You failed." I stared at the words, my whole body numb with fear. I didn't even know what to do anymore. They had me completely, and now I was a loose end. I threw the phone down the alley, watching it shatter against the pavement. But even as the pieces scattered across the ground, I knew it didn't matter. The phone wasn't the problem. They were the problem. And I knew, no matter how far I ran, no matter where I went, I couldn't escape them. I didn't go home that night. I didn't go home for a long time. I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, paid in cash, and stayed there, hidden away, hoping that maybe, somehow I could disappear. Maybe they'd forget about me, move on to someone else. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. A few days later, I woke up to a loud knock on the door. I shot up in bed, my heart racing, my mind immediately jumping to the worst possible scenario. But when I opened the door, it wasn't who I expected. It was the police. They arrested me right there on the spot. Apparently, that woman had called 911 the second I fled her apartment. She'd given a full description of me, and it didn't take long for them to connect the dots. They searched my apartment, found the emails, the laptop, all the evidence that I'd been on that website. They think I'm some kind of lunatic, some sicko who gets off on terrorizing people. They don't believe a word about the dark web or the people who were behind this. Why would they? It sounds insane. It is insane. But that doesn't change the fact that it's real, that they're real. And now, I'm stuck here, writing this from a jail cell. They're charging me with breaking and entering, stalking, and worse. I'm probably going away for a long time, but I don't care about that anymore. None of it matters. Because I know they're still out there. I know they're watching, and I know they haven't forgotten about me. I don't know when it'll happen or how, but I know they'll come for me eventually. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, maybe in a few months, when I've convinced myself that I'm safe. But they'll come. And when they do, I won't be able to stop them. Because I've already lost everything. Everything that was precious to me, my life, my sanity, my future. They took it all away. And now, all I can do is wait.